What's going on, guys? My name is Mac Dunford, and today I'm going to be going over Chapter 5 of Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do with Peyton, and this chapter is titled, What Matters is the Motive / Immanuel Kant. So, the first part of the chapter goes over universal human rights, and what is the utilitarian and libertarian approaches to both of them. The utilitarian approach is that it's easy, they don't believe in universal human rights, simple as that. But libertarians necessarily believe that people shouldn't be used for another's welfare because it violates the right of self-ownership. There's a quote from the novel that states, "My life, labor, and person belong to me and me alone. They are not the disposal of the society as a whole," which essentially states that you aren't here for other people's help. You're here to help yourself and help yourself grow. And then Sandel states that all humans are worthy of respect, people shouldn't be treated as instruments of happiness, and that respecting human rights can maximize one's utility in the long run. So, getting into Immanuel Kant. He was a Prussian philosopher, lived from 1724 to 1804, so he died when he was about 80. He was known for a more hard-going style of philosophy, and he wrote his first novel, The Critique of Pure Reason, in 1781 when he was 57. It's like, being 57 in the 1700s is already old. Just writing your first novel then is like kind of crazy. He gave perspective on an alternate version of duties and rights. He believed that we are beings of rationality, worthy of nobility and self-respect, rather than owning ourselves. He was not a fan of utilitarianism. He believed that it makes our human rights vulnerable. And Kant's points of dignity helped inform a more modern notion of universal human rights. So essentially, we don't use his views verbatim in today's modern rights, but there are concepts from his views that we still apply into today. He had three approaches to justice. The first one was the utilitarianism approach, which states that the way to define justice is by figuring out what will maximize welfare or the morale of society as a whole. He wasn't a fan of utilitarianism, wasn't a fan of this approach. Kant's preferred approach, though, was the libertarian approach, which states that finding a connection from justice to freedom. This just distribution of income and wealth is the distribution that arises from a free exchange of goods and services. The third approach, which he also rejected, was that justice is defined by giving people what they morally deserve, rewarding and promoting one's virtue. So the trouble with maximizing happiness. Morality cannot be based on just observational considerations, so like what you want, what you're desiring. Since these factors can be interchangeable, they don't teach us sense from right from wrong, and they can't serve as a base for these universal moral principles. Kant believed, though, that the desire for happiness misunderstands what morality is truly about. The utilitarian's happiness principle, and I quote, contributes nothing whatever toward establishing morality, since making a man happy is quite different from making him good, and making him prudent or astute in seeking his advantage quite different from making him virtuous. Kant believed that, quote, pure practical reason can help people achieve the supreme principle of morality. So what is morality? Kant believed that the moral worth of one's actions consists in the intentions from which the act occurred in. What matters is the motive. For an action can be morally right, but the action must be done in terms of moral law. So we observe actions by how they are done and what leads to them, rather than what it produces. The supreme principle of morality. So in order to figure out the supreme principle of morality, Kant saw three ideas as contrasts. The first one was morality, which brings the contrast of duty versus inclination. The second one was freedom, which brings the contrast of autonomy versus heteronomy. The third one is reason, which brings up the contrast of categorical versus hypothetical imperatives, which is the one we're about to get into. So categorical versus hypothetical imperatives, like I said before. There are two ways that a reason can command one's will. The more familiar version is hypothetical. So you think of an instrument of reason like, if I want to get in shape, I'm going to eat better to go to the gym. Or if I want to make money, I'm going to get a job. Categorical, though, is shown as a contrast. So the action would be good only as a means to do something else. Categorical imperative commands without any need for a future purpose. And only categorical imperatives can be used as a sense of morality. And there are two types of categorical imperatives. First one is universalizing your maxim. So your maxim refers to a rule that gives reason for an action. And humans should only act on a rule that we could universalize without conflict. And people found this form is very unpersuasive. The second one is to treat people as ends or persons. It's a clear moral force in this imperative. Moral law isn't founded on purposes or interests. So you suppose there was something whose existence had an absolute value. I can't believe that humanity has an absolute value as one's end. And morality and freedom is the final slide I'm going to go on today. So moral law has a principle for people to treat others with respect as ends, also known as the categorical imperative. Acting with this categorical imperative can help one act freely, and through a hypothetical imperative, you don't help with your outside forces, so you don't act freely. This leads back to Kant's view of utilitarianism, which bases morality on a certain interest that was never going to succeed. And I'm going to end this on a quote from Kant that states, "For what they discovered was never duty, but only the necessity of acting from a certain interest. But any principle based on interest was bound to always be conditioned and one cannot possibly serve as moral law." So yeah, this is going to go into Peyton's part now.